Welcome back to another episode of The Danger Zone with yours truly, Niall Moyna. For today's episode, we will be talking about a man who was once one of the most dangerous men in Colombia, and whose violent legacy continues to affect the country to this day. As you've probably guessed, I am talking about the notorious Pablo Escobar. Once the most wanted criminal in the world, with entire nations working to bring him to justice, Pablo was able to maintain a generous public opinion, which allowed him to continue his criminal activity while making the task of stopping him extremely difficult. The story of Pablo's rise to prominence, his vast amounts of money, and his unprecedented strategies enabled him to amass great power in a country that was already experiencing high political tension. Ultimately, Pablo's actions resulted in the destabilization of the Colombian government, the effects of which are still evident today. Born into a poor family in a poor country, Pablo's upbringing, coupled with Colombia's tumultuous history around the time of his birth, collectively abetted his efforts to grow his fortune and expand his influence in Colombia. Pablo was born on December 1st, 1949, during the beginning stages of La Violencia, the name given to a 10-year civil war that is estimated to have displaced 1 million people, killed 300,000, and injured another 800,000. Pablo Escobar was born into a poor family in a poor region, which, after he independently amassed a large fortune, helped establish him as a man of the people in the minds of the many Colombians who shared similar upbringings, due to the country's disproportionate distribution of wealth and economic opportunity. During this period, the allure of communism was extremely prominent in this region, which was recognized and combated by both Colombia and foreign nations as a grave threat to democracy and globalization in Central America. This instability in Colombia, coupled with Pablo's relatable childhood and his vast wealth, set the stage for Pablo to establish a strong sphere of influence using diverse methods to secure leverage. Pablo strategically employed multiple and varying methods to establish and maintain his power, which in turn created varying deep-seated opinions about the man. He used his money to establish and maintain influence by bribing police and government officials to ignore his operation, and to secure public favor with his numerous philanthropic endeavors to help the poor. Pablo used his advantageous public opinion to launch his political career against corruption and the political oligarchy, eventually winning a seat in Congress in 1982 that automatically granted him judicial immunity and a diplomatic visa. Escobar was also notorious for his brutality in dealing with those that got in his way and refused payment, which worked to secure power through fear, but also resulted in the formation of several militia groups that organized against Pablo. The effects of Pablo's unprecedented methods are still being felt in Colombia today, as the government continues its fight against narcotics traffickers and the remaining military groups, many of which employ methods Pablo pioneered to further their cause or fund their operations. Pablo's tactics and the response from the government exacerbated the country's instability and had unanticipated outcomes, which have elongated the conflict. Pablo provided resources and aid to guerrilla groups making political claims to continue their fight against the government, the most notorious example being his involvement in the siege of the Palace of Justice by rebel group M19. Paramilitary groups separate from the government formed to fight against Pablo and guerrilla groups, who then turned to crime to fund their operations and maintain power. Pablo's political corruption claims provoked cynical opinions of the government, while his denunciation of extradition as a violation of Colombia's sovereignty and the ensuing war delegitimized the government by highlighting its inability to independently uphold security. The political turmoil that preceded Pablo's rise to power set perfect conditions for an actor like Pablo to gain favor among the subjugated citizens that have been neglected by their government. Pablo's rags to riches story inspired many to idolize him, while his brutality and extremism caused others to demonize him. Regardless of the opinions held about the man, Pablo's life and legacy can still be evidenced in Colombia today, whether that is through the heightened instability caused by Pablo, resulting in the fractionalization of the conflict, or the lack of trust in the effectiveness of political action in Colombia. Pablo's effect on modern Colombia is definitive. His ability to procure and sustain influence in Colombia allowed him to continue his operations while being pursued by multiple nations. The power and wealth that Pablo Escobar amassed during his life rivaled some nations and solidified him as one of the most influential figures in modern Colombian history. I'm Niall Moyna. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you next week on another episode of The Danger Zone.